this lecture, we're going to cover the second half of the PR process, implementation and evaluation. At the end of this part, we'll close this section in a quiz. I will cover these things, answer questions, you'll take the quiz, we'll go for a break. Make sense? Okay. Your book calls it communication, so I put it up there, but we're going to talk about the third process, implementation. So it's the third step. It's also called execution, if some of you have come from a different area where it was called that, and it's also the most visible part of the PR plan. This is where things happen. It's the timing, it's the launching, it's getting out there and doing it. So a lot of times people think of public relations as this third phase. They don't really think about the research and the programming that went into getting the implementation. They just think about implementation. What you typically do with implementation, especially as you're preparing to present it, is you list everything that has to be done. And it's a very complete list. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. But it's websites going live. It's meetings that you're going to hold. It's approval processes. It's things going to the printer. It's communications. It's speeches. It's meetings with the press. Everything and anything that has to happen in order to get from not having a campaign to a finished campaign should be listed. And you want to think about the credibility, the context, the content, and the clarity. As you guys read this week, there's a lot that goes into communication that make it so people understand what you're saying, that help a communicator actually reach their audiences. And a lot of it has to do with the timing, the way you say something, the context that you say it in. So you think about that when you create this master calendar. And you also consider the communication theories that play in. So your reading talked about those theories, and I'm going to go over that today. What I would recommend is you work backwards from the deadline. Sometimes people tend to start where they're at and work forward, but you end up pushing your client's objectives too far out. Sometimes you have to tell a client, we can't make it happen by this point. But usually, if you say everything has to be done by May 31st, and you go back from there, okay, so when do we need RSVPs in? When do we need to send the invitations? When do they need to go to print? Or when do we need to book a venue? When do we want to contact the press? All of those things you work backwards. Here's an example of how you could display the implementation calendar. Right here is the timing. The second column is a spokesperson, because in public relations, it matters who you have sending which message. So sometimes you want the head of your company. Other times you might want a really satisfied customer. Other times it might be a third party endorsing. So you think about who's going to say it, the channel. We've talked about that in the basic communication method. Is it going out through print? Is it going out online? Is it face-to-face? How are they communicating it? Why are they communicating? This is the purpose. Here's the content, what they're including in that, who the audience is, and who's accountable. So who's going to make sure all of that happened. Usually, if it's a one-man shop, like in a lot of nonprofits, your name's going to appear on that quite often. You're going to be the one making sure things happen. It'll probably be the CEO that does a lot of the communicating, maybe the president. You might use a lot of channels that are less expensive. For example, online, things are less expensive. If you create it, then you can get it out there, right? But if you think through big things that happen, for example, Oscars, think about everything that went in to making that happen. All of the different timing, when they started to release the dates, when they had the voting happen, when they started releasing those drip, drip, drop type commercials that tell you a little bit and a little bit more and kind of lead you into it. When they picked who was going to be the MC, when the MC confirmed it, when they set up what the decorations were going to look like. All of that would have been on their calendar, right? And they each would have had an identified person responsible for communicating it, a way they're going to communicate it, the target audience, and the message, and then who's going to make sure it happens. So that's what you want to think through. When you create this section, think about all of those questions. Now, the questions you want to ask that your reading really highlighted is it appropriate, meaningful, memorable, understandable, and believable? Those are things that good communicators want to know. It's something that you would generally think about. You have a message and you're trying to get it out. So when you're thinking about the timing and the context and who you're saying what to and who's saying it, these are questions you should ask. We've talked about this some, but is it appropriate? So there's certain timings. For example, after tragedies, Most companies should not announce that they're celebrating their 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary or something like that. It doesn't matter if it coincides with the same date. You don't talk about it on a national tragedy, right? Because it's not appropriate. It's the wrong timing. Is it meaningful? So sometimes there's certain times of year that make messages big. For example, if you're around a campaign that involves thankfulness, gratitude, maybe giving back, maybe shoot for November. Why would that be? Very meaningful time, right? It's going to be somewhat harder to launch that on Mardi Gras, right? It's just not the place where people are thinking. And so as a PR person, you want to think, when are people already kind of in that train of thought so we can come alongside of it so you're not fighting against a general assumption? Is it memorable? There are so many messages out there right now. You have probably seen at least 100 PR messages in this past week. But I would estimate that you remember a lot fewer, right? Can anyone think of a PR campaign that they've seen? Nothing in PR coming to mind? Anyone watch the Oscars? Yeah. Okay, good. So we have an Oscars. We have the hacking, Twitter hacking. Anyone see that recently? Yeah, the Jeep was hacked and Burger King, and then MTV staged a hacking so they could do a PR stunt. Now, I really remember MTV's staged hacking. It's very memorable. It was not meaningful, and I think it was definitely not appropriate, so it didn't reach their message, but I remember it. I also remember Yahoo, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. You're going to do a project around it, but they recently announced that there could be no more working from home, which is a big part of technology companies right now. So they have this huge wave of PR happening right now. Carnival Cruise Line. Anyone been hearing a little bit about that? That's PR. So every time you hear a message, is it memorable? Is it meaningful? Is it appropriate? Is it understandable? And is it believable? So understandable is a big part. Usually where people struggle the most when they start PR is they want to get all the information out there, and it's not really in an understandable fashion. You have to use theories, which we'll talk about, but to help people from going and having no knowledge to being a fan. They can't just have no knowledge and the next day be a huge raving fan. There has to be something in the middle. And is it believable? Anyone remember the BP oil spill? Okay, do you guys remember the statement from the CEO? He made a statement about, I want my life back. That was the memorable statement he made when he was trying to advocate for why BP oil was equally concerned about the oil spill and cleaning up. Unfortunately, it came across and is remembered as being unbelievable. People don't think the company cared. They saw him as self-centered, as someone who didn't understand that lives were ruined through this, and he just wanted his life back. He wanted his free time. So things like that. Who is saying the message? That helps indicate whether it's believable. What's the order that you said the message? That helps with understanding. When and how do you say the message is memorable, and meaningful and appropriate come together in a context of when you delivered it. So as a communicator, your reading says you have 5 objectives. I kind of think we have a ton, but let's keep it simple. We'll have 5 to start with, right? So message exposure. Obviously, as a PR person, one of your goals is to get your message out. You want people to hear your message. That's a goal. And you actually want them to hear it accurately, right? So it doesn't do much good if people are talking about your brand, but they're misinformed and they're saying all the wrong things. So for example, the Twitter hacking. Last week I was sharing with some PR people about it, and they said, oh yeah, MTV was hacked and Jeep was hacked and Burger King was hacked, and they were all fake, right? 2 were real, 1 was fake. But it's very bad for a brand if they start getting lumped in. It's not accurate dissemination of a message. Maybe everyone knows that it wasn't real, it wasn't actually what was happening at Burger King, but the information is no longer accurate. Acceptance of the message. So maybe you're getting your message out there and maybe it's accurate, but as a communicator, you don't only want people to hear it, you want them to actually believe it, to accept it, to value that point of perspective, change their attitude, and change in behavior. Now, if you remember last week with the objectives, there were 3 kinds of objectives you could have, right? What were they? Perfect. Knowledge, predisposition, behavior. Look at these goals for a communicator, and you see it again. You see that it's knowledge, right? Predisposition, behavior. So as a communicator, you have levels that you're trying to get out there. Knowledge is the first level. It's hard, but you can get knowledge, information out there. People can become aware. The next goal is to change their values, opinions, beliefs, and ultimately, you want to see their behavior changed as a result of this new information. So it's a growing influence that you would have through your message. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm really excited about this. I think this is incredible that through the power of communication, through something you can help an organization do, the result can be this. People can go from knowing nothing about your product, your client, your brand, to changing their behavior based on something you said. That's a lot of power. So we've talked about this some. We have a sender, a message, a receiver, feedback, and the channel. This familiar to you guys? Cool. It's a very basic explanation of communication, and as you advance in the PR classes, if you keep taking them, I'll tell you why I actually don't like this if you try to go too deep. But if we're looking broad level, surfacey, this is a good thing. But that's the problem that happens, right? We have noise. It's not a perfect model. And noise is what happens when you're trying to send your message and the people you're trying to communicate it to don't hear it. So what could be noise? What are some examples? Noise is figurative here, by the way. Yeah.
Like other competitors trying to get their message.
Yeah, other competitors. Yeah.
Lack of research on your part.
Yeah, lack of research. Good. What about personal values of the audience, right? Maybe because of what they believe, they're not going to hear because of their preconceptions, right? What about things happening in the community at that time? So if there's a huge issue happening in the community and you're trying to come in with a new message, they might not hear it. It's not that you're not sending it. It's not that you're not using a channel, but there's a lack of communication. Wilbur Schrom, who you guys read about, basically said this exact same model, but he used these words. And usually there's confusion. Most people tend to resonate with this, but his says there's a source, which is basically the sender. There's the encoder, which is the channel, the signal, the decoder, and the destination, the person you're sending it to. There's not a lot of feedback accounted for in this loop, but you kind of see how it could work, because once it gets to the destination or your public, then they become the source, and they encode information, and they send it to you. So it's a basic process, and he is credited with this explanation of how communication could work. And again, as PR professionals, with the goal of getting your message out there, you want to have a basic understanding of how communication works. So he kind of sees it like this, becoming a circular motion, a circular movement between sending information, getting information, sending information, getting information. And again, you could see where noise would come in the middle. Yeah? So we're talking about two-way communication. This is what he is arguing for, is that there should be two-way communication. If you remember throughout history, public relations has not always really advocated for the two-way communication, but we do now. We actually see it as a primary function. So one way, in our mind, only disseminates information. It doesn't really involve the audience. It doesn't recognize their values. It doesn't look for that feedback. In the symmetric model, understanding is a principal objective rather than persuasion. So basically what Mr. Grunig is saying here is that PR has moved beyond simply just trying to persuade, simply just trying to get a reaction. We are now in a paradigm where we try to understand. We truly want to understand our audiences. We actually care what they think, what they're going through, where they're at, what they believe, what they value. And I think that's really important. I can't stress that enough for you guys. I love PR. I could talk about it all day, which you guys know. You're in a class for 3 hours with me. But it's not about just getting people to do something you want. For me, I love PR because I love people. I am truly fascinated with them. I love seeing the differences and knowing where they're at and communicating. And the reason why I can be so excited about public relations is because every client or campaign I get behind is something I actually think benefits people. I think it brings about good. In some way, it brings about good. So I think that's great news. I can come alongside people and be like, you know what? Let me tell you about this because it helps you. Or because this brings about something that's good for the school district, or good for your children, or good for the church. I am excited because it genuinely helps people, because I genuinely care. And I think that is the crux of the issue. When people have a problem with public relations, inevitably it seems to go back to people who abused that power of communication, who sought to only persuade, who didn't care about the public, who don't care what happens. But that's not PR. That's not where we're at as an industry. That's not what we're committed to as professionals, and I really want you guys to see that. So let's get into communication theories. Theory is usually something that makes people think, oh no, now we're to the boring part of the lecture. It's not. A theory is basically an explanation for how communication works. Different ways of looking at it, different ways of trying to explain what's happening in a situation. So I'm going to walk through some of the main ones that we use in public relations. One of the main ones is media uses and gratification. So it continues to look at communication as a two-way process. But essentially, the question that's being asked when you use the theory of media uses and gratification is, why are people using the kind of media that they do to get a message? Why would someone turn on the television? Why would someone go to Facebook? Why does someone use the newspaper? Why does someone read a magazine? What is it about that form of communication that provides gratification, that makes them want to use it again? Why is this an important question for PR people to ask? It tells you a lot about your audience. When I am trying to figure out the best way to get my message out about politics, I know a couple things. I know that people use newspapers differently than they use other forms of media. Newspapers typically are gratifying because they have more in-depth information, correct? It's usually pretty timely, but you can read a lot more. And there's something about that print copy. And most people who read newspapers generally are, what age group would you think? Yeah. So if I'm trying to target an older population with a complex message, newspaper would be a great media to use, understanding media uses and gratifications, right? But what if I'm trying to start a grassroots movement with college students? What kind of media would be useful? Yeah, the internet, social media. Why is that? What kind of gratification does it give to college students? Yeah.
It's instant and fast, and you just pull it up on your phone.
Yeah, instant, fast, pull it up on your phone. A lot of times college students say they use social media to feel connected, to find out news, and to disseminate information about their beliefs or their opinions. So if I want to do something with grassroots, I really want people to feel connected to the cause. I want them to expand into their relationships and to talk about that, to talk about a value, opinion, belief. So understanding the gratification they get from that kind of media, this theory lets me know which channel to use. Does that make sense? Are you guys seeing how you use this to pick a channel, a way to communicate? Cool. So there's two kinds of audiences. We briefly touched on this. There's actually way more, but let's keep it fairly simple. So active, they pay attention to your messages. They're really sitting there. They're ready to hear about it. So for Biola, you all typically are an active audience. Does anyone know what was announced this morning in chapel? Yeah, Jesus Saves sign is coming back to campus. Now they started that here because you guys are an active audience. You're a great group to tell first. Why would Azusa not have been the perfect place to announce that?
They don't like us.
Because they don't like us. More because they're not paying attention to our messages. They're not tuned in, right? And if you guys hear about Azusa Pacific information, you're not as tuned in per se because you're not active in that audience. And the same is true for brands. There are certain brands I'm very active with. I am very loyal to Amazon. If there's something you random to know about me, it's that I do everything on Amazon. I order laundry hampers, I order my chai tea, I order my clothes, I order Christmas gifts, I order all of my books, I order office supplies. I think I even ordered like a cupboard once, and I ordered my moving boxes, all off Amazon. Anytime anything is said about Amazon, I'm like, oh really? Tell me more. I want to know about this because I love Amazon. I'm an active audience, right? My husband, on the other hand, is very techie. If I want to know anything or if anything breaks, he's going to fix it. He knows the latest technology coming out. He knows when Apple's going to release or possibly could release things. He knows about like hard drives and what a solid state hard drive is or something like that. All these things that I have no idea. I'm really thankful he does know. But I am passive. I only pay attention when I have to. but he's active in that. He's focused, right? So if they wanted to reach an active audience, they'd go after my husband, not after me. Does that make sense? Do you guys kind of see the difference? Passive only pays attention because it's entertainment. I might listen to a cartoon or an advertisement that's talking about things like I really enjoyed the Mac versus PC ads. I think they're hilarious. Not necessarily because I like technology, because I think it's funny. That's entertainment. Or if you've seen the new Honda ads where he's like, well, I want to help. I'm here. Anyone watch the Honda ads? Okay, obviously I have way too much free time. If you're on Hulu, there's a Honda ad right now. I'm not shopping for a car. I actually like Fords. I actually like old cars because I'm less panicked because I figure no one wants to steal my car if it looks really bad. So I'm in no way looking to get involved with Honda. But I watch their ads because they're funny. So I'm a passive audience, right? I'm not going to take action on that. So that's the difference. Understand who your active audiences are and your passive. Your active audiences are the people that are probably already past the awareness stage and more into the behavioral or the at least disposition, the idea of their values, opinions, and beliefs. Your passive audience probably needs to be made really aware before they're going to move anywhere near changing their values, opinions, beliefs. So when you break up your audiences, we talked last week about segmenting, you're going to have different groups. And in those segmented audiences, you're going to recognize, wow, some of you are passive, some of you are active. There's also latent publics. There's all kinds of publics. You need to understand how to move them along the trail. How do you get a passive audience to active? How do you get someone who doesn't care at all to at least watch because it's entertaining? How do you get people interested? So there's communication tips that are used within this. One is use effective language. Even though I don't care about Honda, it's been very effective to learn that they have a great deal on their new 2013 car because they used language I understood. It's not too techy, it's not too abstract. I get it. They're extremely clear in their presentation, and they use symbols, acronyms, and slogans. They don't have a lot of jargon, and it's not that they're the best car in the world, it's just a good car for a good price is essentially what they're saying. They're not saying that they're huge, they're not using euphemisms, that's what basically it is, and there's no discriminatory language. So for example, there was an ad, I'm trying to remember what it was, and it was targeted just towards men, I think, and it was some sort of Pepsi or cola drink, and it was last year. Which one?
I feel like it was Dr. Pepper.
Maybe it was Dr. Pepper. It was a really interesting ad, but no matter who I showed it to, there was the recognized element that it was really discriminating. It was trying to target just men, which is fine, but when it's a product that's consumable by 100% of the population, why would you discriminate against 50%? Even as a marketing ad. We could talk about that as we go further, but you want to think for communication. If you know you're talking to active and passive audiences, both of them might be hit by your messages. These are things you want to do to move both parties along, not just your active, not just the ones who are super stoked about something, but the ones who maybe only listen because they're entertained. How do you get them to the next stage? Believability was one of the things we wanted to talk about, and it's huge in public relations. How many of you have heard something from someone's mouth that you don't believe? A CEO, a president, yeah? Actually, I think America, I've been reading some statistics, I don't have one to back it up right now, but in general, America is at an all-time high of disbelieving brands and organizations. We have this sense of, I'm not really sure if you're trustworthy. Prove it to me. I'm not sure if you're credible. And there's a number of things that have led to this, like Enron. You guys all know about that, right? Okay, that kind of started a catalyst. It was a big conspiracy within an organizational setting. But we've had multiple things happen. Anyone remember Invisible Children from last year? That was another issue. Great organization, but there was some questions with credibility. You see it all the time. And the thing about organizational communication, the thing about publics going and seeing a group, an entity, an organization, individual, celebrity, whatever, they're going to say, how do I know what you're saying is true? How do I know you're not just trying to persuade me to get my money, to get my volunteering, to get my beliefs? How do I know you're being honest? So one is source credibility. When DBC talks about Biola, he's credible, especially with parents. Why do you think that is? Exactly. His son goes here. So as a parent, he knows what the process is. It would be very different if his son was at Azusa Pacific, right? He could still talk about Biola, but it wouldn't be from a parent perspective because his son wasn't here. Because his son's here, that's huge. The context, the timing. If you try to manipulate people based on timing, they're gonna know it. They're gonna pick up on that really quickly. And when that happens, your credibility goes out the window and your believability. If people feel like you're just sending a message because you might be able to persuade them in the moment, that's not gonna be good. Predispositions. This is another theory, the cognitive dissonance theory. Now this concept goes along with believability. I might not believe someone to start with. For example, I never really was a huge fan of iPhones. Okay, I'll be real, I hated iPhones. I did not want an iPhone at all. And my husband, being the tech person he was, thought he was gonna die without an iPhone. And he did really good. He held off for a long time. But what he did was use the theory of cognitive dissonance on me. Looking back, I see it very clearly now. What he did is help me move from my belief, my opinion, into saying, okay, fine, we'll get iPhones. First, he helped with the knowledge change. You want to introduce someone. If they believe something and it's not accurate, give them the new information. Tell them how something has changed. I said, we don't need phones. There's no way that I need this above my little flip phone. It does great. I just need something that calls. But then he said, well, how do you know when your students are emailing you? What about social media? You might need this in the industry. Look at this report. All the PR people have one now. So he's helping me know that something changed. He gives me that new information. That's something to think about. I had my belief about my phone working, and then he gave me new information. Unexpected spokespeople. He pointed out to me all of my friends who did have it, who I never would thought had it. And I'm from a small town. We don't have a lot of stuff, so I'm more like, well, if people in Africa don't need it, why do I need it? Out comes the study, hey, look at all the people in Africa who are using social media phones. Okay. So unexpected spokespeople. All of those things went from me believing something, he introduced new information, he showed me another spokesperson, he gave me knowledge that would help change. We have iPhones. That's cognitive dissonance. And the word cognitive, your mind, dissonance, space. Separating that belief with new knowledge, new information. Does that make sense? That's something you can do to do believability. If they don't believe you, give them information. Tell them how it's changed. Introduce spokespeople that could also relate to where they're at, and then get them involved. Questions on that? Okay. One other area, communication was a huge chapter for you guys, was remembering. As communicators, we're not just talking in the moment, we want people to remember what we're talking about. Words are powerful. They change everything. But if people never remember it, how's that gonna help? So your reading talked about repeat, repeat, repeat. It is true, but you don't really want to be boring. So when we say repeat, public relations, we send messages, and it's the same key messages, but it's in a variety of ways, right? So you're not going to say the exact same wording on a postcard and on social media and in an interview and then in the face-to-face person conversation. You're going to use different ways to get your messages out. But the idea is that by sending it a number of times, you're going to set off the noise. You're going to get past it. Something is eventually going to get through. The more times you share it, the more opportunity it has to reach that person, to break through the noise. The key is to convey it in a variety of ways, because you don't know when your passive audience is going to tune in. You don't know when that noise is suddenly going to dissipate, and voila, you have the chance to get your message out there, right? So you need to come up with a lot of ways to get your point across. And that's where your strategies and tactics come in. When people only have one strategy on their program plan and their whole process, that's really dangerous. Because if that one strategy fails, if that one communication attempt fails, you're not going to have a campaign. Your audience is not going to be influenced. So come up with multiple ways to reach them. Not all audiences will hear your message at the same time. That's why you disperse over a period of time. It's also, don't launch everything on May 1st. Maybe you have May 1st, May 10th, May 15th, May 20th, May 31st. There's time. This is the adoption process. Your reading talked about it, but I think this is one of the most important theories you can really come to understand, especially in Intro to PR. The idea is that people go through a process. Remember, you go from not knowing anything to becoming a fan. And that process is on this side. First of all, you have to become aware. Something has to let you know that you should find out more information, right? Then you're interested. So you might get those details. You decide to evaluate whether you want to commit. You give a trial to it, and you adopt it. Now this sounds very abstract, but think about it. Anytime you've tried something new, you've probably followed this process. How many of you have used a new product or been part of a new cause within the last 2 months? Okay, yeah, we usually do fairly often. Now, just to make it easy, I'll share about my mascara experiment with you. I tend to really want healthy mascara. Don't ask me why, I just do, right? So I had to research what mascara would be good. I became aware of a brand. And I thought, well, I can compare. So I got some more information. I was thinking about this brand. I looked at their ads. I looked at what people said. And that was in the interest phase. I became interested. And I evaluated, do I want to try this or do I want to keep looking? Should I go with this one? Should I do this one? And I decided, you know what? I'm going to evaluate it. I'll try it out. And I got that brand of mascara. And now that's all I want to use. That's very simplistic. But you can take that a lot further. My husband and I just got out of being a youth pastor. And we had to find a new church because obviously it's really awkward if the new youth pastor comes in and you're breathing down his neck. That's just not the great way to go. So we had to start this process all over again. Which churches should we go to? Which ones are we aware of? Then which ones are we interested in? So we started getting more information on the ones we were interested in. We evaluated what would best meet our needs, and we tried several out, and we picked one to start attending. You can do this with a cause, when you become passionate about something. When my husband and I, before he worked for Compassion International, now that he does, it's different. But before, we became aware that there were kids out there who we could help. And we were interested in what that looked like, so we got all the details. We evaluated whether we should commit to that, and we tried it out by having one child that was our sponsor child, and now we have 5, and we love them, and their pictures are gonna be up in our houses. Make sense? So hopefully you can think through how you've gone through those stages yourself. And you can think through how you would take an audience through it. That's the point you want to get to. How do you get someone to be aware, to be interested, evaluation, trial, adoption? Now the complex thing is all your audiences will be different, right? So you can launch one campaign and part of your audience will be up here, and part will already be at the trial, and part will be in the evaluation, and part will be adopting. So you need to understand the complexity behind a public relations campaign. How do you reach all of those publics in different stages? And you want to help all of them make forward movement. You want to help all of them get to adoption, but you don't talk to someone in the trial phase the same way you talk to someone in the interest phase. You don't talk to someone who's adopted it the same way you do in the awareness phase. It's different. So how do you get those different messages out there? Your reading talked about some of the things that impact it. So one is relative advantage. How helpful is it going to be if they adopt this, right? Or compatibility. How does that work out with their life? How does it work out with where they're at? Complexity. If they want to learn more, is it very complicated? Are they going to have to get lots of details? Is there a brochure they're going to read? Are they going to have to go to a 3-hour lecture? Trialability. Some things you can't test out unless you're all in, right? That's very difficult. Why do you think car dealerships have test drives? You don't have to buy the car to be able to test drive it because we want trialability. So when you plan a campaign and you're asking people to commit either to a behavior or a value, an opinion, a belief, can they try it out? Is there some way they can experience what you're talking about without fully committing so that they can really evaluate it and jump in? And observability. Some companies, the hardest part for them is that they should be open. They should be sharing what they're doing because people want to see it. They want to witness what's taking place. So again, Compassion as an example, they take people down to the projects so they can see these kids and their lives because that's observable. That's something people can see and get on board behind versus just, oh, no, we do good things. You just can't come see it. See how there's a different level of me getting involved? So typically, how you have those 5 stages of adoption, there are people who go through them at different paces. So let's talk about technology. If there's a new piece of technology and there's the awareness phase and the interest phase and the evaluation and all of that, people go at different speeds. My husband is an innovator. he will move so rapidly through all 5 stages, from becoming just aware to adopting it and loving that technology. There's people who are early adopters. They're not the very first ones, but they're highly in tune with technology. They'll go after it, right? There's the early majority. That's where a group is going through and actually reaching that adoption stage. The late majority and the laggards. Now, okay, for technology, I wouldn't say I'm a laggard. I would hope not, but let's be real. I just got my smartphone and apparently everyone in the world has one. So I'd be late majority with that, right? It's not like I went through it really quick. But if you start talking to me about social media trends for organizations, that's my specialty. I help people understand that, you know what, late last year, Pinterest launched business boards, and here's how you can use it, or here's how organizations are using Facebook. So I try to push people to be early adopters or innovators in that technology. And a lot of people on social media, they don't really care the business side of it. They just care about the user side. So they might be in the late majority or early majority. So you have to think, this relates back to your audience's opinions, their values, their beliefs, their context. What kind of person are they and how quickly will they move through that adoption phase is based on this. And you can categorize people into these sections and say, okay, the innovators, they're gonna move quickly. So maybe we should send them invitations to be part of this early on, because then they can be people who are excited with us and they're telling their friends and they're becoming spokespeople for it. They're advocates, right? You don't wanna invite an innovator late to the game, because that's not their personality. They would have liked to be involved early on, but now that everyone else is doing it, they probably moved on to something else. Do you see how these time frames relate to the adoption? Kind of? Okay, cool. We'll keep working with it. All of that goes through the 3rd stage, but now we're at the very final one, the evaluation, which is exciting. I told you guys we would get through this and you're gonna be PR pros, but we kind of gotta go through how you evaluate. So this is the 4th step out of all of them, and it's the management of results against established objectives. That's really what we're talking about. You're going back and saying, here's what we set out to do, and here's how much we achieved that goal. I'll walk you through exactly how we can do that, but this is essentially what you're doing in this stage. You guys are all doing so great writing, I don't want to move on too quick. Evaluation really relates a lot back to your 1st stage of research, because research helps you understand what you're doing. So evaluation must measure your objectives. Last week we talked about making SMART objectives. And the whole reason is because you need to evaluate it. When you make a SMART objective, you listed a time frame, you listed an audience, and you listed a measurement amount, like increased by 80%, or increased by 13%, or have 20 followers, those kind of things. That's so you can evaluate it. You go back to that, and it proves the value of PR. It says that we do create results. We do bring ROI. Our work matters. We're not just fluff. It also keeps PR professionals accountable, and it allows for learning and betterment of individuals and the industry. Sometimes people are afraid to evaluate because they don't want to find out they failed. I kind of think if you're afraid to evaluate, you probably already know you failed. And that's okay. Failure is a huge part of this industry. But you don't stop at failure. You pick up and you keep going and you learn and you do the next campaign better because of it. That's the value of evaluation. Within evaluation, there's some different kinds of evaluation we can talk about. There's different standards, and we're going to walk through that. But does this essentially make sense of why we're doing evaluation? Any questions on that? It's a key part. That's often why we're not credible in some eyes of people, is because we don't give them a strong evaluation. So there's a huge push towards that. And these are some terms within evaluation you should know. First of all, evaluation, essentially it's conducted all the time, because evaluation as a term is just taking measurements of where you're at, your evaluating process. But we also call the last stage evaluation. So we have formative research, which is what you do in the very 1st stage. Formative forms your public relations campaign, and summative research is the ending. It's how you figure out what happened. It's how you determine if you met your objectives. And it also gives you research that helps you on your next campaign, because it's a cycle. When you reach the E in RPI, the evaluation, you're going to start again at the R. You're going to hit research again. So you want to get the kind of evaluation that helps you move forward. So you're not starting back at square one. Measurement, when you use that term, you're essentially saying you're looking at a defined criteria. When you're looking at the measurement of an objective, you're saying, is there a number that we can look at? Is there a criteria? And research, as you guys know, is using measurements in a systematic and controlled process by accepted standards. So we use research to look at measurements that give us evaluation. And you evaluate throughout the whole phase. You start with evaluation and research. You kind of measure it as you go along, and then you have summative research that informs the end of the campaign, that lets you know how you did. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, cool. And I'll come back to these for people who are taking notes, but I just want to keep moving so we get you to your quiz. So 3 areas that you do evaluation, 3 things you can look at. The first is program conceptualization and design. Does the planning part meet what it needs to do, reach what it should, and properly display budgetary issues? So the design is kind of the implementation, if you think about that. It's how you communicate it, it's the timing, it's the budget, it's the organization behind it. That's one thing you can look at in a campaign. And usually, for people who are newer to PR, I see problems in the conceptualization and design. For example, if you want to launch a huge event and you gave yourself 3 weeks in which to do it, it's not enough time. So in my evaluation of it, the conceptualization was where you fell short. You might have had a great plan, but the design and conceptualization didn't work. You also want to monitor the monitoring and accountability of program implementation. So did things happen when you thought they would? Did you reach the people you intended to? And then the last one is assessment of program utility, which is essentially what we just talked about, looking at those objectives, measuring what you said you would set out to do. Oftentimes, people like to measure outputs instead of outcomes. Outputs are things you do. We sent 20 invitations, we created 50 press releases, we talked to 30 journalists, we went door to door in 15 neighborhoods. Those are all things you do, right? So in the past, PR professionals would use that as their evaluation. But what is the problem with having an output as your evaluation? Yeah?
You don't consider the results.
Yeah. There's no result, right? That's fine and dandy if you did all that work, but what difference does it make if your audience never heard your message? So you need to consider outcomes, which is what the objectives are. How were people influenced? How are their values, opinions, beliefs changed? How are their behaviors different now? Any questions on this part? And again, I'll come back to it because I see a lot of you taking notes, but we're going to keep moving forward for now. One thing you needed to measure was media production. That's the output that we just talked about. That's one thing you can measure. It's valuable, but it's kind of a secondary measurement, right? It also talked about the measurement of message exposure. That's a huge thing. How far out did it get? And then measurement of audience awareness, attitudes, and actions. Now bear with me. In the objectives, we had 3 kinds you could set. Knowledge, predisposition, and behavior, right? Okay. Then as a communicator, the 5 goals of the communicator were to move people through knowledge, predisposition, and behavior, yeah? So in evaluation, it makes sense that you would measure knowledge, predisposition, and behavior. Are you guys seeing the connection throughout the whole PR campaign? A little bit? Okay, okay, good. Your reading had 6 measurements, so I want to familiarize. 1 was production, and 1 was exposure. These are things you can use in measurements. So production is what do you produce? That's called outputs. That's what we just talked about. What did you make? What did you produce? The exposure is what clips do you have? So media impressions, people who visited a website, how many people buy a magazine that your article was in, the numbers that are associated with Facebook or people calling in. Those kind of things are exposure levels. Does that make sense? So you have production, things you do, exposure, how many people possibly were impacted through this measurement. And this is small, but you're going to see the connection. Audience awareness, audience attitudes, audience action. Do you see those 3 coming up again? And then the last thing that your reading talked about, the 6th one, was supplemental activities. So if you did tests, if you run a content analysis, if you do different things in the community, those could be extras on top. So those are the 6 areas it talks about. Honestly, the effective way for you to do public relations, and the thing I'm adding on, your reading talked about these 6, but it comes back to something like this. It's much easier to conceptualize. If you're having trouble with all 6, think about these 3. You're looking at the program utility, which is the objectives, which measures values, opinions, beliefs, behaviors. You get down to those 3. You look at whether you reached the people you said you would, and you look at how you timed it out. Did it work with the context, the timing, the amount of times you shared a message, the person you picked, the believability. It's the conceptualization, it's the accountability, and it's the objectives. Do you guys kind of understand how evaluation would work? Any questions on that? All right.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.